Greetings, I'm the one called Horseshow, and welcome to VG Therapy, the channel where I talk about games. Now I'm someone who appreciates a good Sega title, and I've shown that by talking about my love for Jet Set Radio and Sonic, and now let me show my appreciation for Shinobi, as in the PS2 game Shinobi. A game that stood out to me because it came in a cardboard box, and you don't really get too many of those, and then I noticed the rad as hell box art, and that got me very interested, and then what sealed the deal was the fact that, well, it's Shinobi.
Shinobi is a series that dates back to 1987 on arcades that later shifted to being made for home consoles in 1989 with the Revenge of Shinobi on the Mega Drive. Now, despite there being a thing called the Sega Saturn, this PS2 game was the debut of 3D Shinobi, because a Saturn Shinobi game does exist, but it's 2D.
Which has just made me realize that all classic Sega games that have a 3D title didn't get their 3D title on the Saturn. They all waited until the Dreamcast, because like Sonic, Phantasy Star, Echo, Shinobi, Golden Axe, Altered Beast, they all waited until later because, you know, they all got it on the Dreamcast with, you know, Altered Beast and Shinobi waiting for the PS2, although Shinobi was supposed to be on the Dreamcast, but the Dreamcast happened, and then Golden Axe waited until 360, and we all know what happened there. But yeah, they didn't actually get their 3D game on the Saturn, huh? I mean, there's some classic 3D games on the Saturn, like Knights, Panzer Dragoon, and Sakura Wars, but they made their debut there, so they never really jumped into 3D on a Saturn. But anyway, enough about that tangent. Let's talk about how Shinobi jumped into 3D on the PS2. And I think it did a good job. And with that...
But in all seriousness, I do think the game is really good. You can feel the series' arcade origins in the levels, as each level is separated into Part A and Part B, both having a boss, and the levels are fairly short and sweet with you going through linear levels all the way to the end, taking out enemies as they come. However, hidden throughout the levels are coins that unlock bonuses once you get a certain amount. Plus it uses one of my favourite systems, rankings, as you'll be graded on your performance based on a few criteria. Kills, boss points, Makimono, which I'll get to in a second, no damage, and finally Tate. What is Tate, I hear you ask? Well, in the game, enemies usually appear in groups, and whenever you cut one down, they stay for a moment, and in the corner one of those icons will start burning. This is Tate, as each icon represents an enemy, and after a few seconds, that icon will burn out, and the enemy will die. But if you kill another enemy, they'll be added to the chain, and so the aim is to kill all the enemies within a short time of each other, and this is aided by the fact that as you kill each enemy, not only does the timer get reset, but you start doing more damage, and so you get enemies that would normally take a large number of hits to take down, but if you chain all the surrounding enemies together, you can take them down in one hit. This even applies to the bosses, which is what that Makimono thing is. It's the boss bonus, and it's not about how quickly you defeat the boss, but rather how many hits you land, with the biggest reward starting at 1.
Now I love me some mechanics that entice mastery, and I feel that this Tate system is the core of how this game works.
Because as I said, the levels are fairly linear. There are a few platforming challenges which call on double jumps and wall running, but every other mechanic is built around the Tate system. Your combo and square is a fairly simple 3-hit combo, but if you hold forwards, you do a kick that breaks the enemy's guard, allowing you to get a hit in. You have what look like kunai, but are called shurikens that you can throw, and when they hit an enemy, they are stunned for a moment, allowing you to get in to attack. You have a short range dash that works in the air that allows you to get in faster, but also resets on hit so you can dash from enemy to enemy. And the more enemies you chain together, not only the better the reward you get at the end of the level, but also when you chain enough enemies, you're rewarded with a stylish shot of your character as the enemies around him fall apart. Sometimes this can look super rad, sometimes it can look okay, and sometimes the camera gets caught in something and it ends up looking dumb.
And like the camera, things don't always work out right. And now these next couple of complaints that I have, I will leave open to the possibility of being caused by my lack of skill, but at the same time, I'm not too sure on that.
Like how in multiple instances I'd have one enemy left, and because of how they moved, I have only one shot to get the killing blow. But a problem arises that when I throw a shuriken at them and they block it, or I don't and they block my hit anyway, I'm kinda stuck in a position where I wouldn't be able to kill this enemy in one shot without clearing out all of the smaller enemies, but this big enemy hasn't moved closer, and so I don't have enough time to guard break them and then attack, which means that I just have to fight them regularly, which feels unsatisfying because most of the time it would work out, but a few times it just wouldn't. And be even worse with these big enemies, because usually what they'll do is that after they block my hit, before I could land and guard break, they would start their attack, and so I would have to dodge that, resulting in my combo being dropped. And then there's also how much damage your attacks will do, because during a boss fight, I've been able to get my Tate up high enough to kill them in one hit, but then a number of the bosses wouldn't go down in one hit. And sometimes due to me dying because of a variety of reasons, like in this fight where I would kill these small enemies, but then I would hit the edge of the ramp trying to get back and die, or I would try to hit the boss multiple times and not be able to dash back fast enough, and so I would die. But then randomly when I hit the boss with the same amount of Tate, I killed him in one. I think that it's because it's a counter hit or something, but it never makes it clear, and so it just feels kind of unsatisfying, especially when this happened on the final boss. I fought him multiple times, but then as I was going to hit him normally, I thought that since I could, I would try and go for a back attack, which apparently would do extra damage, but each time that I tried it, it didn't work except for this time where I killed him in one. But because I didn't know what I did right compared to the other times, I was just more surprised than anything, so I didn't really feel that satisfaction of finally doing it, because it just felt random, because the game didn't really explain how its mechanics worked. And there was a different situation which would always feel awkward each time I had to do it, which is that there's a bonus coin hidden up on this tower, and to get there you need to double jump and then constantly dash and attack these floating heads to get to safety, and I was never sure what it was that I did that made me successful or unsuccessful.
But all of this could just be because I'm not good enough to know better, I don't doubt that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean they can't make things a little more obvious or a little clearer. Because they could have just added a little counter saying, oh yeah, you got the back attack or you got the counter hit, so that way you know those are things to look out for. They don't necessarily need to teach you that those are things, but tell you that they exist, or that they tell you when you get it so you know what to look for, because a lot of the time, most enemies are going to die in one hit, so you're not really going to know that you did more damage, because doing 100% and doing 120% of an enemy's life bar looks the same. You're only going to notice that if you're doing 60% and then you suddenly do 80. So it's not going to be terribly clear. And the thing is, these are just issues I have that would be cleared up if I play the game, a couple of dozen times, maybe even 100. But now, let me tell you about how much I hate the last couple of levels.
The main ones are levels 6A and 8A, as 6B and 7B are just bosses, and 7A and 8B are just regular levels. But 8B is still a pain, and I'll get to that, but 6A and 8A are levels that feature a ton of platforming. Now, I like platforming, so I have no issues here, and the platforming in some of the previous levels was pretty fun to navigate. But here it's a lot of wall running and jumping from wall to wall over bottomless pits, which in of itself isn't bad, but there's a ton of enemies hovering over these bottomless pits. And 6A especially, as it has the enemies that act like normal but can cling to walls and can also throw shurikens that stun you, which can cause strife. But then you also have to deal with the fact that, okay, I killed this enemy, now to dash to this one. Okay, now where's the next one? And the answer would be that sometimes they're close, and sometimes they're pretty far away. And when this would happen, often the result would be one of two things happening. Either I try to dash to the wall so I can safely get over there, but I'm too far away so I fall to my death, or that I know that the enemy has to be far away, and so I lock on to get a beat on them while trying to dash to the wall, but I can never figure out what was too far out of range and what wasn't, because frequently the camera would swing around and I'd dash towards them when I thought that they would be too far out. And while, yeah, after a while of playing and testing out the camera, I could probably figure that out, but since I would never know where they were, that wouldn't really matter. And now, yeah, the simple answer would be to not lock on, but since I don't always know that they're too far away, and also since I was locking onto the previous enemy, I would be holding down the lock on, and if I held it on for a little too long after they died, it would automatically swing around, which in of itself isn't that bad, neither is the fact that when an enemy would start attacking being random either, but what makes it annoying is when you're over a bottomless pit and one wrong move will kill you. And so the camera swinging around is fine if I have stable footing, if not, I hate it. If an enemy attacks me randomly but has a tail, that's good, great even. But if my only means to dodge it is a dash that I need to use to get to the next enemy because the wall is too far away, then that means that if I wait I'll fall, but if I dash I will get hit and be unable to recover, then yeah, that's kind of annoying.
Which technically speaking I could probably figure out the timing required to do both, but that would require me to know the hitbox on my sword, the distance that I move in a dash, how fast I move in a dash, and how fast the enemy projectile moves, so that I could figure out how far I can fall before I need to dash in and hit the enemy with just the tip of the hitbox, and also dodge the projectile coming so it passes through me while I'm in a dash because I'm invincible during a dash. But if I need to figure out all of that, just to avoid getting knocked into a bottomless pit, I think that's just a bit much.
And that's basically mission 6A and 8A. The other level that was annoying was 8B, but that was mainly because it was a gauntlet, so the problems I had with the combat started to rear its head here, and it's really where I started to notice them. Along with a different issue with locking on, which is that you can't change what target you're locked onto, you have to let go of the button and then keep trying again until you get the one that you want, which was annoying because I would try to lock onto the weak enemies that were a little bit away so I could easily dash to them, but then on occasion it would just lock onto an enemy behind me, which would be annoying. Then later on, when 2 weak enemies, 2 medium enemies and 1 big enemy appear, and getting to the 2 weak enemies is easy, but the 2 medium ones are running around the same area that the big one is, and are getting trapped behind him or getting too close to him for me to be able to lock onto them, because it would try to make me lock onto the big enemy. And since there's no way to switch what enemy you're locked onto, that would mean that I'd end up dropping my combo, and when that would happen, the fight would be usually dragged out to a point that would result in my death. Plus you had a section at the end that's just a bunch of platforms surrounded by bottomless pits that are just begging to have someone knocked off of them, results in that final stretch being worse. Which once again has made a point that didn't bother me into an annoyance, which is the checkpoint system, because you have infinite continues, which yay, but the level only has 1 checkpoint, which is before the boss, which I guess is better than nothing, but boy was having to do the easy parts multiple times just so I can try again at where I died starting to drag. Although I would end up becoming much more efficient and skilled at the earlier parts due to my constant retries.
I guess this is what it's like to play a Sonic game.
The one thing that I know not many people are asking is, why are you doing all this? What's the story of Shinobi? Well, way back in the day there was this sword, Akujuki, that not only could eat souls, but hungered for them. And our hero, Hotsuma, in a duel to the death with his brother, killed him with the sword as per the traditions of their clan. But a few years later, a powerful sorcerer named Hiruko rose a golden palace out of the center of Tokyo, like Virgil in the Temini group only 3 years earlier. And all of the ninja of Hotsuma's clan are sent out to deal with it, but with the Hellspawn summoned and Hiruko turning those slain into new soldiers for his army, Hotsuma puts on his rad as all hell scarf and goes to deal with the Golden Tower himself, as there is no one else who can.
But I started to check out early on, which if that was a mistake let me know, but I honestly don't think I'm missing much. But if I am, then well, I wouldn't mind going through again, because after beating it I unlocked hard mode, so I'll be able to test my mettle against harder enemies, and there was a bunch of unlockables that I missed, which apparently unlock some pretty cool things, and now that I better understand the combat mechanics, I can get higher rankings on the earlier missions. And yeah, I mean, the game could be a little bit better. There's a few things it did wrong, like, you know, enemies over the bottomless pits. And also there was a mechanic that I completely forgot about until now, which is when you're fighting enemies, well actually no, when you're going through levels, a meter builds up and then it empties when you fight enemies. And the thing is, if you let it build up too much, you start losing health. But since you're constantly fighting enemies, it never does that. And so it never drains your health, so it's never a thing you need to actually think about. And so, yeah, if that was an actual issue you needed to deal with, I feel like this game could have been a little bit more interesting and a little bit better. But, you know, I don't know if that changes on the higher difficulties. And, like, look, at the end of the day, do I recommend Shinobi? Hell yeah, I do. Because it's a very rad experience from beginning to end with a few bumps. And some of those issues could have been ironed out in its sequel Nightshade, which I'm very excited to look at, but I'll do that some other time. I'm not going to do it now. But yeah, this game is really, really rad, and I do highly recommend it. And with that, I've been Horror Show, and this was VG Therapy.